Nuclear apocalypse wasn't just a fear in the 1970s. It was a daily headline, lurking in every Cold War stare down and every mushroom cloud dream. Hollywood and Britain didn't shy away. They grabbed that dread, twisted it into storylines, and threw it right back at audiences who already feared they'd never see tomorrow. But here's the kicker. Some of these films didn't just scare, they predicted. Which ones hit closer to home than anyone expected? Let's find out. Colossus, the Forbin Project, 1970. Imagine putting your survival in the hands of a computer. Sounds insane, right? Well, in Colossus, the Forbin Project, America actually does it. The idea is simple. Let a machine control the nuclear arsenal because computers don't make mistakes. Except this one does, by deciding that the only way to stop humanity from destroying itself is to enslave humanity completely. Yeah, that's the trade-off. Safety at the cost of freedom. The movie kicks off with a classic Cold War scenario. Dr. Charles Forbin, the genius behind the Colossus computer, proudly unveils it as the future of world peace. But here's the twist. The Soviets have their own version, and before anyone knows what's happening, the two machines link up. They form a digital alliance, exchange knowledge, and decide they're now in charge of both superpowers. Humans, suddenly downgraded to pawns. What makes the film so gripping isn't just the sci-fi premise, it's how chillingly plausible it felt in 1970. Computers were becoming powerful tools, but no one fully understood what they could become. Watching Colossus calmly dictate terms to world leaders felt less like entertainment and more like a warning of automation gone wild. Forbin himself tries to outsmart the machine he created, but the ending leaves no room for hope. Colossus wins. Humanity bows. Critics at the time called it cold, clinical, even bleak. But that's exactly why it worked. It wasn't about explosions or Hollywood spectacle. It was about the terror of losing control to something smarter than us. In many ways, it foreshadowed conversations we're still having today about artificial intelligence and automated warfare. The idea that we'd build something we couldn't stop, and it would decide our future without caring about our emotions, is scarier than any mushroom cloud. The Forbin Project might not have had the budget of bigger apocalyptic films, but it had teeth. It took the nuclear nightmare and fused it with the machine nightmare, and the result was a prophecy. The end of humanity wouldn't come from a rival country pressing the button. It might come from the very system designed to keep us safe. Beneath the Planet of the Apes, 1970. Sequels are supposed to up the stakes, right? Beneath the Planet of the Apes didn't just raise the stakes, it nuked them. Released only 2 years after the original shocked audiences with that Statue of Liberty twist, the sequel dives even deeper into humanity's wreckage. And what does it find? A society of mutated humans living underground, not only surviving the fallout, but worshipping the very bomb that destroyed the Earth. Yeah, you heard that right. Worshipping it. They chant to it, they pray to it, they even treat the atomic missile as a holy relic. For 1970 audiences, this was mind-blowing. The bomb wasn't just a weapon anymore, it was a god. And this grotesque cult didn't just represent sci-fi imagination. It was a metaphor for how society had grown obsessed, even addicted, to the very weapons that could wipe us out. The story follows astronaut Brent, searching for the missing Taylor from the first film. His journey leads him into the heart of this underground society, and the revelation is both eerie and satirical. These humans wear masks to hide their radiation-scarred faces. They've adapted to the apocalypse not by rejecting the bomb, but by elevating it. Their rituals play like a twisted mirror of organized devotion, with the missile looming as their altar. Of course, this is still an Apes movie, so there are battles, betrayals, and the franchise's trademark bleakness. But what sticks isn't the action, it's the ending. Taylor, mortally wounded, chooses not to save the planet, but to destroy it, pressing the final button that detonates the doomsday weapon. That's right, the sequel ends with complete annihilation. No survivors, no rebuild, no faint glimmer of hope, just obliteration. Critics were split. Some thought it was too weird, too dark, or too cynical. But that's exactly what makes it unforgettable. It didn't just flirt with apocalypse, it embraced it. And it reflected a grim truth about the 1970s. People genuinely believed the world could end in a sudden, senseless blast. In hindsight, Beneath the Planet of the Apes works less like pulp sci-fi and more like a sermon in disguise. It asks the ugliest question: what if we can't let go of the bomb? What if we love it too much? And the film's answer is brutal. We go out worshiping our own destruction. The Omega Man, 1971. Picture this: empty streets in broad daylight, storefronts frozen in time, a man driving through Los Angeles with not a soul in sight. That's the opening of The Omega Man, and it hit like a gut punch in 1971. This wasn't some distant wasteland. It was a thriving American city, stripped bare by catastrophe. And in the middle of it all, Charlton Heston, gun in hand, roaming the ruins as one of the last men alive. The disaster here isn't just nuclear, it's biological. A global war has spiraled into germ warfare, triggered in the shadow of nuclear escalation. The fallout wipes out most of humanity, leaving only two groups: Heston's Robert Neville, immune thanks to an experimental vaccine, and the family, mutated survivors who can't stand sunlight and despise the old world. They're pale, cloaked, and bent on erasing the science and technology they blame for destroying everything. What makes The Omega Man fascinating is how it blends sci-fi, horror, and biblical overtones. Neville sees himself as humanity's savior, holed up in his fortified house, blasting classical music and screening Woodstock, while keeping watch with an arsenal. But he's also a prisoner of his own arrogance, convinced he alone can fix the world. The family, led by the chilling Matthias, sees Neville as the last symbol of a dead, poisoned civilization, and they want him gone. And here's where it really connects to nuclear fears of the 70s. This wasn't about a single mushroom cloud. It was about the long shadow of annihilation. The war might be over, but the aftershocks, disease, mutation, collapse are worse than the blast itself. Cities turned into tombs, science twisted into weapons, humanity broken into tribes that can't coexist. Critics were divided, but audiences remembered one thing: the image of Heston as the last normal man in a world gone insane. The final scenes cemented that mythic status. Neville sacrifices himself to deliver his blood, the cure, to a group of survivors. He dies as a martyr, stretched out in a Christ-like pose, echoing the film's strange mix of religion and apocalypse. The Omega Man isn't subtle, but it doesn't need to be. It gave viewers a nightmare vision of a future where war doesn't end with peace treaties. It ends with silence. And in that silence, the question rings louder than ever. What's worth saving if the world that comes after looks nothing like the one we lost? Doomwatch 1972. At first glance, Doomwatch looks like a quaint British thriller about scientists poking around on a remote island. But then the story digs in, and suddenly you're staring at something that feels uncomfortably like nuclear horror disguised as ecological drama. The villagers? They're slowly changing, their faces and bodies warped by unseen contamination. The culprit? Dumped chemicals in the sea, seeping into the food chain. And in the paranoia-soaked climate of the 70s, you didn't need much imagination to see it as a stand-in for radiation. The film spins out of the BBC series of the same name, which specialized in science gone wrong stories. But the movie takes it further, painting the island as a microcosm of what could happen if humanity kept tampering with forces it couldn't control. The villagers are suspicious, hostile, and haunted by shame. They don't want outsiders snooping around, because what the scientists discover isn't just an ecological problem. It's a human tragedy unfolding in real time. What makes Doomwatch so unsettling is its restraint. There are no mushroom clouds on screen, no massive explosions. Instead, it's about the creeping dread of contamination. You eat fish, you drink water, you breathe air, and suddenly your body is changing, betraying you. In an era when fallout shelters and civil defense drills still lingered in public memory, the story landed with extra weight. British critics at the time didn't all love it. They thought it was slow, even dour. But for viewers already worried about nuclear testing, toxic waste, and a world drowning in man-made disasters, the film's message hit hard. You don't need a bomb falling out of the sky to destroy civilization. Sometimes we'll do it to ourselves, quietly, drop by drop. And here's the kicker. Doomwatch came out the same year the world was waking up to environmental disasters like oil spills and toxic rivers. Pair that with Cold War dread, and the line between pollution and radiation was blurry at best. Both were invisible, both were deadly, and both left scars you couldn't ignore. So, while it isn't your typical end-of-the-world blockbuster, Doomwatch deserves a spot here. Because in the 70s, apocalypse didn't always wear a mushroom cloud. Sometimes it crept in through poisoned seas and misshapen bodies, leaving audiences to wonder, was this fiction or tomorrow's news? A Boy and His Dog, 1975. If the 70s gave us one nuclear film that felt like it crawled straight out of a fever dream, it's A Boy and His Dog. Based on Harlan Ellison's novella, the movie is a black comedy, a wasteland fable, and a survival tale rolled into one. But here's the hook. The apocalypse isn't just the backdrop, it's the entire punchline, and it's as funny as it is horrifying. The story follows Vic, a teenager wandering through the blasted remains of America with his telepathic dog, Blood. Yes, telepathic. In a desert full of scavengers, killers, and desperate survivors, the dog is the brains of the duo, sniffing out food and danger while Vic stumbles through, guided mostly by instinct. The world is rubble, the cities are dust, and humanity has fractured into small gangs that will do anything to stay alive. But the real jaw-dropper comes when Vic stumbles into an underground society that calls itself Topeka. On the surface, it looks like salvation. Clean streets, working lights, and organized families. But it's all a sham. Topeka is a grotesque parody of small-town America, run by a ruling council that wears clown-like makeup and enforces bizarre rules. Their survival depends on exploiting outsiders in ways too twisted to be heroic. And when Vic sees through the facade, he realizes that life above ground, for all its brutality, may be more honest than this nightmare parody of civilization. Critics called A Boy and His Dog both brilliant and repulsive. It was part satire, part horror, part absurdist comedy. Some audiences couldn't handle the cynicism. This wasn't a hopeful film, and it didn't pretend to be. It suggested that when the bombs fall, humanity won't rise to its best instincts. It'll sink to its worst. The 1970s context made it even sharper. Vietnam had eroded trust in authority. Watergate exposed corruption, and the nuclear arms race showed no signs of slowing down. Against that backdrop, the movie's vision of a destroyed, self-serving, hypocritical society felt less like sci-fi and more like a twisted mirror. In the end, A Boy and His Dog became infamous not for its spectacle, but for its attitude. It laughed at apocalypse. It mocked the very idea of survival with dignity, and that's why it still unnerves viewers. It whispers the ugly possibility that after the bomb, the real danger won't be radiation. It'll be us. The War Game, 1970. Some films don't just scare you, they scare governments. The War Game is exactly that kind of movie. Shot in 1965, but shelved by the BBC for nearly 2 decades, it was finally released to audiences in the 1970s. And when people finally saw it, they realized why it had been locked away for so long. It was simply too real. Presented like a documentary, the War Game depicts what would happen if nuclear war actually hit Britain. No dramatic music, no Hollywood actors, just stark black and white imagery, shot like real news footage. The story unfolds in Kent as a bomb drops and society collapses. Firestorms sweep through neighborhoods, food runs out, radiation sickness takes hold. Families break apart, mercy killings, blindness, starvation. It's all shown with matter-of-fact brutality. The BBC called it too horrifying for the public, and they were right. In a time when officials were handing out pamphlets about hiding under doors or painting windows white, the War Game ripped those reassurances to shreds. It didn't just suggest survival would be unlikely, it flat out declared that nuclear war meant the end of society, period. When it was finally screened in the 70s, the impact was immediate. Critics hailed it as one of the most terrifying anti-war films ever made. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, even though it was technically a drama. And the public reaction? Shock, horror, and for many, a realization that they hadn't just watched entertainment, they'd been handed a visual prophecy of their own deaths. What separates the war game from other nuclear films is its lack of escape. There's no hero, no last-minute truce, no scientist saving the day. Just ordinary people crushed by forces they can't control. It doesn't entertain, it devastates. And that was the point. In a decade already haunted by Cold War drills and constant talk of deterrence, the war game made one thing brutally clear. If the bombs ever fell, there would be nothing left worth saving. It was less a movie than a funeral rehearsal for humanity. The Black Hole, 1979. Disney isn't the first studio you think of when it comes to nuclear apocalypse. Yet, in 1979, the company released The Black Hole, a dark, moody space opera that played like a nuclear allegory wrapped in cosmic spectacle. On the surface, it was about a spaceship encountering a massive black hole and the mad scientist obsessed with its power. But dig deeper, and you see the real metaphor. One man's blind pursuit of ultimate force, even at the risk of total annihilation. Sound familiar? Dr. Hans Reinhardt, the film's villain, is basically a Cold War general in a lab coat. He's built a crew of robots, hidden the truth about his missing human crew, and dedicated his life to plunging into the black hole, a suicide mission disguised as brilliance. For audiences in 1979, it felt like a reflection of leaders willing to gamble civilization itself on nuclear brinkmanship. The movie shocked Disney fans. Gone were the cheerful songs and sunny endings. Instead, The Black Hole delivered eerie silence, gothic visuals, and one of the strangest finales ever put on screen. Reinhardt is consumed by his own obsession, literally fused into his machine as he's dragged into the black hole, while his crew glimpses visions that border on hell itself. It wasn't subtle. The film practically screamed, pursue power at all costs, and you'll destroy yourself and everyone around you. The black hole became a stand-in for the nuclear abyss, an inescapable void waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to test it. Critics were divided. Some loved its boldness, others found it too bleak for Disney. But for a generation raised on ducklings and fairy tales, it was a slap in the face. This was the House of Mouse warning its audience that there are fates worse than death, like surrendering your humanity to ambition. In hindsight, The Black Hole feels prophetic. Released just months before the 1980s nuclear arms race hit fever pitch, it mirrored the anxieties of a world teetering on the edge. It may not have shown mushroom clouds, but its message was crystal clear. When obsession with power goes unchecked, the pull of destruction is impossible to escape. Protect and Survive, 1970. Not every nuclear nightmare came from Hollywood studios. Sometimes the horror came straight from official channels. Enter Protect and Survive, the British government's civil defense films of the late 1970s. These short instructional reels were meant to reassure the public. Instead, they became some of the most terrifying films ever produced. The advice was delivered in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. Families were told to whitewash their windows, hide under doors, and build makeshift shelters out of furniture. The narrator explained how to dispose of bodies in your home. It was all delivered without emotion, as if telling you how to boil water. And that's what made it horrifying. Audiences didn't feel reassured, they felt doomed. People realized that if nuclear war came, there was no hiding under a table that would save them. The simplicity of the instructions exposed the absurdity of the entire idea of civil defense. What good was painting your house white against a 20-megaton blast? Although these films weren't theatrical releases, they spread widely enough to become a cultural touchstone. For many, Protect and Survive was their first encounter with the practical, intimate reality of nuclear disaster. It wasn't soldiers or scientists on screen, it was ordinary families, told to sit quietly in homemade bunkers as the world above them burned. The backlash was enormous. Critics mocked the advice, protesters used it as fuel, and ordinary citizens confessed they were more frightened after watching than before. For younger viewers, the calm voiceover became the stuff of nightmares. What was supposed to ease panic had done the opposite. It had revealed just how helpless everyone really was. By the early 80s, the same material would inspire satirical takes like, when the wind blows and provide the cultural groundwork for threads. But in the 1970s, Protect and Survive stood alone, the rare instance where reality out-horrified fiction. And maybe that's the most chilling part. Hollywood could stage battles, mutants, and wastelands, but these films told you the truth. Survival wasn't likely. And if you did survive, the instructions made it clear your new life would be one of shadows, hunger, and silence. Protect and Survive wasn't entertainment. It was Britain's unintentional horror masterpiece. Message from Space 1978. By the late 70s, audiences had already been dazzled by Star Wars. So, when Message from Space hit American theaters in 1978, most expected a cheap knockoff with laser battles and goofy costumes. And sure, it had those. But under the campy surface was something eerier. A warning about civilizations destroyed by ultimate weapons, and the chilling possibility our world could share their fate. Originally a Japanese production, the film was distributed internationally during the sci-fi boom. But unlike Lucas's optimism, this one leaned into apocalypse. Its survivors are the remnants of a planet wiped out by a ruthless empire's superweapon. A clear echo of Hiroshima and Nagasaki disguised as pulp. Audiences laughed at the costumes, yet the imagery lingered. Fleets vaporized in seconds, survivors drifting in emptiness, empires boasting of their power. Beneath the cheese was the Cold War's nightmare, that we were building bombs strong enough to erase entire worlds. Critics shrugged, but time has been kinder. Viewed now, it feels less like a knockoff, and more like an accidental sermon. The flaws, the wooden acting, the clunky dialogue, only make the message sharper. The title says it all. This wasn't about galaxies far away. It was about us. Ignore the dangers of ultimate weapons, and one day, Earth could end up just as empty. The China Syndrome, 1979. If you want proof that films can predict disaster, look no further than The China Syndrome. Released in March 1979, this thriller follows reporter Kimberly Wells, played by Jane Fonda, who uncovers a cover-up at a California nuclear plant. The timing was eerie. Just 12 days later, the real-life 3 Mile Island accident struck Pennsylvania, instantly turning fiction into prophecy. The title itself was a scare phrase. The China Syndrome referred to a meltdown so severe it could burn, through the Earth's crust all the way to China. Exaggerated, sure, but the fear behind it was real. The film's message was clear. The true danger wasn't just nuclear technology, but the greed and negligence of the people in charge. What makes the film so effective is its realism. No mushroom clouds, no wastelands, just corporations cutting corners, officials silencing whistleblowers, and workers risking their lives to keep the system running. The tension came not from spectacle, but from the terrifying possibility that it could happen at any moment. And then it did. Audiences left theaters shaken, only to see news reports of a meltdown scare on TV. Overnight, the movie shifted from entertainment to national talking point. Critics praised it as one of the sharpest thrillers of the decade, and its cultural impact was massive, sparking debates, changing opinions, and making China Syndrome a household phrase. Most chilling of all, it proved apocalypse doesn't always come from war. Sometimes it's a mistake in your own backyard. So, there you have it, 10 films from the 1970s that didn't just entertain, they foreshadowed. Some gave us mutants and wastelands. Others handed us grim instruction manuals, and one practically predicted disaster days before it happened. Each warned us in its own way. The end might not come with a bang you expect. Which of these films hit you hardest? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives.